All right, good evening. Tonight we're learning Maseches Chagigah Daf Yomi. Nothing makes someone who teaches Daf Yomi happier than seeing an Amud Beis like Yotes Amud Beis. It's like 10 lines. Oh, it's mamish. Masak midvash nofesh tzufim. It's yeah. Of course, you recognize that means that some of the concepts we're learning we're totally not going to understand, because if you look at the Tosfosim on this page, they're monsters and they require months of research and work, but we're going to do it in the next 25 minutes. So we're starting at the top of Yud Testament Aleph, at the top line. Yesterday, we saw a shita that had indicated that if a person washes their hands for chulin, that you don't have to have any particular kavana. So on the top line of Yud Testament Aleph, the Gemara says, "Minat Timra." From where can we say? How do we know? To chulin lo bo kavana, that chulin doesn't require kavana when you wash your hands. So this, the Gemara gives a fascinating answer. The Tanan, we have a Mishnah. The Mishnah writes, "Gal shenitlash ubo arba'im sa." Let's say that there's a wave that disconnects itself from the ocean. So the waves are coming in, and this wave is coming in. It's not dangerous, just pops out, right? But it's not going to kill you. It's just going to cover you in water. So gal shenitlash, if the wave separates itself from the water, and there is 40 sa in that, of the volume of water, there's 40 sa. V'nafal al ha'adam ala kelim tahorim. And a person is lying on the beach, minding his own business. All this water comes down. He happened to have been tamei, and the kelim with him happened to also be tameim. All of a sudden, everything is tahor. He didn't have one machshav in his head, nothing at all. Where do we see from here? Oh, it's obvious that by chulin, you don't need to have any graisa machshavas. It's all simple. Katani adam dumila kalim. It seems to be that there is a comparison between the human being and the kalim. Ma kalim de lo michavne. Clearly, the kalim can't have any intent. Af adam de lo michavne. It must therefore be that a man doesn't have to have kavanah in order to become tahor for eating chulin. But the Gemara doesn't like this. 5 lines down. How do you know that this is true? Dilma, maybe the guy was sitting there in order to get tahor. Dilma, biyoshe umetzape masait lashagalaskina. He's sitting there watching these guys surf, and he's like, perfect. Some of these waves will be great. I'm tamei. Let the water hit me in the head. I'm lying on a beach chair. Everything's going to be great. So maybe we're mitzape masait lashagalaskina. And not only that, but the comparison should be the opposite. Not adam to kalim, but the kalim dumya de adam. Ma adam dvar kavana. You need to have kavana. Av kalim demechavena lehud. That therefore you also have to have kavana for kalim. So we tried to bring a raya from the Mishnah of Gal HaNitlash of when the wave separates itself from the water, but we're not able to learn anything from there because there's 2 ways to understand it. Almost as a parenthetical question, the Gemara says, with the Havamina that you had, if in fact you're sitting there waiting, that I don't need a Mishnah for that. It's basically going to the mikvah, right? I'm lying down. I'm waiting for water to be poured over me. That's a mikvah. What are you worried about? That's a mikvah. So what's the chiddush you would have taught me had that been the way to read the Mishnah? So it says the Gemara Sal Kadai Tachamina. I might have thought that a person is not allowed to go to the mikveh that way. Why not? Ligzor, we should restrict him from doing so because Dilma Asi limit shel geshamim. Because maybe he would equate what's happening here, a wave separating itself from the ocean and pouring on him, to a stream of rain that's pouring off of your broken gutter at the top of the house. Torrential rains, and literally just one stream of 40 sa of water comes off of your roof. So they seem very similar. The case of the wave coming off of the ocean and the chardal is the gutter that's just literally dumping water on you. They're not the same. So we might have thought that because of the chardal shel geshamim that we would have said that you're not allowed to wait for the wave to fall on you. The cases are too similar and only one of them works. Inami, another possibility is nigzor roshna, to keep it, that maybe we would have said that we should restrict the possibility of waiting for that wave to hit you because there's a difference between the wave hitting you when you're on the ground, the roshan, the head of the wave, the front part of the wave that actually touches you, versus the keepin, which is the dome of the wave while it's still in the air. Kamash malan de lo gazrinan. What the Mishnah would come to teach us is that there is no problem at all with standing there waiting for the wave to hit you. It would perfectly make you tahor, provided that the wave had 40 sa in it and you were only hit by the first part of the wave.
So you're standing on the ground, right, and you're not in the water.
You're going to be covered by the water.
Doesn't everything have to be not touching anything else?
That is a very reasonable question, and it's going to be even more reasonable later. And from the Gemara, it seems that you don't need it.
Okay.
Now, it's not the way that we practice. So like we have mikveh attendants when women go to the mikveh to ensure that their whole body is submerged. It's tanua, they go into the water, they're not, and they just make sure that their hair is there. And for women who have long hair, a woman will like kind of bring all of her hair down Sometimes you see like the men with the long payas doing the same thing. You just got to get all the payas and you got to bring it under the water. So they have to make sure that happens too. So that we're very, very makbid on that. However, we'll see a havamin at the Gemara, in the Gemara, that if my feet are in the mikvah and my hair is still wet and I put something on my hair, that could be metaher something. It's like Gemara's havamin. Crazy idea. Yeah. Based on principles from Maseches Eruv and Maseches Shabbos, good asik and good achis. We'll get there at the bottom of the page. All right. So then the Gemara says, based on the last line we just said, so hold on one second. If the front of the wave hits you, so then you're tahor. But if the middle of the wave hits you, you're not tahor. The roshan hits you, you're fine to keep it not. Minat timra, we're 12 lines down or so, you test them at aleph. Minat timra, how do we know, from where do we say delomat bilan bekipin, that you're not allowed to tovel something in a wave? Let's say you're holding a spoon in your hand and you see a huge wave just literally going over your head. You take the spoon, you raise it up straight into the water. Perfect. And you're done. Great. Start eating.
You have to let go?
As long as it's Ray Labila, whatever. I'll assume that you did, but it doesn't matter.
Your hands are wet.
Your hands are wet. You have to assume the water can get there. So the Gemara says that's not allowed. It has to be only the roshan. It has to be the front waters of the wave that hit it and not the dome of the water, the arc of the water. So how do we know that that's true? Says the Gemara, Tanya, mat bilin beroshan. You're allowed to use the end of a wave for tefillah, ve'ein mat bilin bekipin. But you're not allowed to use the dome of the wave, the center part of the wave. That's not allowed. Why? Lefisha ein mat bilin be'avir. You're not allowed to tovel things in the air. Okay, I guess I kind of hear that. I think Texas' question is still perfectly valid. I'm lying down on a beach chair. All of a sudden, the wave comes. You're like, I'm tummy anyways. This is perfect, and it's going to be refreshing. And all of a sudden, that counts. They have to dump that amount of water on you. So I could bring a raya from one other place. We know that if a person,
because like your back doesn't get the water,
you're not immersed in a body of water.
Like your toes are under the sand, whatever.
Doesn't matter. There's no way if you're pouring water on someone that their whole body is surrounded by water at all. That's impossible. If you're lying, even if you're standing up perfectly, if you're floating, it doesn't matter. There's no way you could dump a bucket of 40 sa of water on someone and every part of their body is covered at one time. It's impossible. The Gemara is not even recommending that. It's just impossible. We just assume that all the water was poured on you. So we do have this in one place, and that is that when there is a lack of mikvah, you are allowed to utilize a system called tisha kabin shalmaim, where you pour 9 kav of water. So I don't remember how many gallons it is, but I did the math once. So like if you have a 2.5 gallon per minute shower head, I can't remember all the calculations, but it's there's a cheshbon. You can stand under the shower for a few minutes. Are you ever immersed in a shower in water, your whole body? 1 second, never. It's impossible. That's called a bathtub, and that's not where you are. But if you pour tisha kabin shalmaim, then you're still tired. So I'm assuming the mechanics here are similar to that than they are to a mikvah. So let's continue.
Before you go,
Yeah.
how does this translate into gallons? We're talking about a cup.
So the measurement is that if you have a rectangular shape filled with water, the cubic size of that would be 1 amma by 1 amma by 3 ammas. So let's turn that into modern math. It's 1.5 feet by 1.5 feet by 4.5 feet. So that cubic number of feet will translate into water, and that will yield how many gallons of water it is. But I don't know the answer to the question. I'm sure you can. I have every ounce of faith in you, Dad. And I can do it without a calculator. I know. Anyways, our first answer is so I love it. My dad celebrated his 78th birthday yesterday. Baruch Hashem. Happy birthday. Yesterday was the day. So says the Gemara, we don't have an answer to our starting question. We had asked about chulin below kavana, but we rejected our first response. So let's try another one. Ella, see this Gemara Ella is confusing because you don't know what the Ella is going on. So I actually write in my Gemara, when there are 2 answers, I write A1 and A2. I have an A2 here because this is not, it's not part of the flow. It's actually going back to our initial question. We had said, how do you know that chulin doesn't require kavana? Ella mehadatznan, we know from here. Peros shenaflu lesoch amas hamayim. If there are fruits that fall into some water, upashat, misha yadav tmeos v'natzlan, and a person extends their hands and their hands are tame and they grab onto the fruit that's in the water. So it says the Gemara 2 things. Yadav tahoros, the guy who put his hand inside the water, his hands are tahor. No kavana, just stuck his hand in. He didn't want to get, he just wanted to grab the apple. That was it. So yadav tahoros and uperos einan b'chiyutan. This is something we learned about a while ago. The principle of kiyutan in halacha is that a fruit can only transfer tuma when it has the liquid of yad shachat dam on them. It's only possible. It's only susceptible to tuma if the fruit is wet. However, it has to be b'ratzon bailim. It has to be that I want tuma to transfer or that I want it to be wet. So therefore, the guy who dropped the apple into the aqueduct, he did not want that to happen. So I take my tamei hands, I stick it in the water, my hands become tahor instantly, but I pick up the fruit, which it's not even halachically susceptible to tumah because it wasn't bedas bailim. So we learn from here, from this brisa, we're not done with the brisa yet, but the brisa clearly indicates that your hands can become tahor even without kavanah. That's what the Gemara says. Let's finish the, what did I say?
No, if it's not violent and it falls into the aqueduct, then it'll be heifer.
We're not talking about ownership. We're talking about susceptibility to tumah. So
if there's no bow, then how?
I'm the bow, I just dropped it.
Still your apple.
Still my apple. You don't get my apple because I dropped it. I just dropped it in water. Then a person who's tamei touches it, doesn't matter. It has to be b'chiyutan. It has to be that it was placed there. Yeah. So then the brisa continues. If he specifically had intention that he wanted to wash his hands, then yadav tahoros, then yes, his hands are going to be tar. V'haperos harehem b'chiyutan. If he wanted them to be there, then great. And then yes, v'chiyutan applies. Anyways, this brisa gives us the answer to our question, which is clearly the case that when one washes their hands for the sake of eating chulin, and they do so with no intentions, the halacha is that it counts. The Gemara has a problem with this. We're a third of the way down in Yud Testament Aleph. Eisvei Rabba l'Rav Nachman hatovel l'chulin v'huchzak l'chulin aser l'maiser. We said in our Mishnah that one who washes their hands to eat chulin, then their hands are kosher for chulin. However, they're not allowed to eat maiser, which is the next level of halachic status of tahara. So then the Gemara says as follows. Huchzak in, lo huchzak lo. Only if he actually does the act of washing his hands does he earn the status to eat chulin. That implies that you need to have kavanah, and that's against the whole principle that we just said, that you can wash your hands by accident and then they're still tahor. Says the Gemara, hachi kamar. The Gemara is not saying that you have to wash your hands with kavanah, just afal pisha huchzak b'chulin. Even if you specifically articulated that you wanted it to be for chulin, that's afal pisha huchzak b'chulin aser l'maiser. It's still going to be aser for eating maiser. In other words, for maiser, for chulin, you don't have to wash your hands with kavanah. You can just wash your hands and they're going to be kosher. But for maiser, even if you went the extra mile, which was unnecessary, and said I'm washing my hands to eat chulin properly, that still doesn't count for maiser. So that question is asked and answered, and therefore we still have our response that washing hands for chulin without kavanah still works. The Gemara asks another question. Eisvei, taval v'lo huchzak. If a person washed their hands, but they had no intent whatsoever, ki'ilu lo taval. It's as if they didn't wash their hands at all. My love, is it not the case, ki'ilu lo taval klal, that really it's as if you didn't wash your hands at all, and therefore even for chulin it would not work? Says the Gemara halfway down low, ki'ilu lo taval maiser, abal taval chulin. It's just to say that you really have to wash your hands. It just can be even without kavanah. So now this was a conversation that was happening between Rabbah and Rav Nachman. Who savar? Rav Nachman thought that when Rabbah was giving his answer, that dachi kamadchile, he was just brushing him away with quick answers, but really he didn't believe in what he was saying to be true. So nafak, dak ve'ashkach, he went out and he searched and he found a Mishnah, a brisa. What did the brisa say? Tanya, taval v'lo huchzak. If a person washed their hands with no kavanah at all, aser l'maiser umuter l'chulin. So now it's exceedingly clear. We have this part of the Gemara is now over. We're going to still talk about a similar topic, but we asked and answered a question so far. Here's the short version of the last 30 lines. How do we know that if a person washes their hands for chulin without kavanah that it works? And the short answer is that we have brisas that seem to agree to it. Good, let's continue. The Gemara says, Amar Rebbe Lazar, taval ve'ala, a person goes into the mikvah, and then Allah, they exit the mikvah. Okay, then machzik atzmo l'chol ma shiur. After, follow the flow, he goes into the mikvah, he comes out of the mikvah. Now that he's out of the mikvah, he can say, I would like to be tahor for X, which is weird because he's out of the mikvah now. So we all would have thought, like, if you have to go to a mikvah with specific intent to eat, kodesh or to touch the mechatas, you have to have specific kavanah. You can't just jump into the mikvah. Here the Gemara is saying you can have the kavanah afterwards. So Meisvei, the Gemara asks on this, Odehu raglo achas b'mayim, if he still has one of his legs in the water, huchzak l'davar kal, and he had kavanah for something that was a low level of tuma, such as meiser sheni, a low level of kedusha, then machzik atzmo l'davar chamer, with your legs still in the water, then you're still allowed to increase your what your focus is. If you start with meiser sheni, right where you got one leg in the water, okay, fine, but I want it to be higher, I want it to be for truma, no problem, that's allowed. But Allah, once you're totally out of the water, shuveino machzik. Once you're out of the water, then you can't make any changes to your kavanah. You're done. And that makes sense. So says the Gemara, doesn't that mean that if you do something after you're out of the water, it doesn't work at all? Says the Gemara, no. Here's the right way to understand it. Lo. Odehu, if you're still in the water, even if you already stipulated one type of kavanah, you can change to another. Allah, if you came out of the water already, so imlo huchzak machzik, then if you didn't make any declarations, then you can make one now. However, but once you did make a declaration, then you cannot change it. So these are just some of the subtleties of the halachos. And the Gemara asks on this that we just learned, Man tana odehu raglo achas b'mayim. Who was the one who stated the opinion that when you have one leg in the water, that you have more latitude? So says the Gemara, Amara Pedas, Amar Rav Yehuda. Amara Pedas, Rav Pedas says that it is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Let's see what this Mishnah has to say. It's going to carry us toward the end of the page. The Mishnah says as follows: Titnan mikva shenimdad v'yesh ba'arba'im sa'a mechuvanos. You have a mikvah that has to the drop, to the milliliter, exactly 40 sa. What happens when you go to the mikvah? You come out wet. Oh, so says the Gemara, mikvah shenimdad v'yesh ba'arba'im sa'a mechuvanos. You have exactly 40 sa. V'yardu shnayim v'tavlo ze'achar zeh. And one person goes into the mikvah followed by another. Who's kosher and who's not? So says the Gemara, Harishon tahor v'hasheni tameh. The first guy, as long as he doesn't go in like cannonball style and all the water's still there, no problem. You are tahor because you benefited from 40 sa. But when he gets out of the water, now there's 39.999 whatever left because he took out a few droplets of water. V'hasheni tameh. That makes sense. There's only 40 sa. 40 sa is the minimum. Fine. And Amar, that was a Tanakama. And Amar Rav Yehuda, it depends. Where do we see our shita that if your feet are in the water, it matters? Right here. Im hayu raglav shel rishon nogos b'mayim. If when the second guy was in the mikvah, the first guy's feet were still in the water, so then af hasheni tahor. Why does this work? So this is a principle that we learned about called gud achis mechitzta. And that means that we assume that the wall will drop down. The same halachic rule applies by water. So let's say that I'm person number one. I go to the mikvah. The mikvah was exactly 40 sa. I have 5 milliliters of water in an aggregate on my body, and therefore the mikvah has less than 40 sa. But my feet are still in the water. Halachically speaking, good achis, we assume the water that's on your body is in the mikvah itself. And therefore the person who's sheni, the second person who goes to the mikvah, still kosher. An unbelievable idea, especially considering that the hashara 40 sa is only a din d'Rabbanan. We know that
that's if he goes in while you're standing.
If my feet are I'm on the top stair, but my feet are in the water, and I have a small amount of just, whatever, some water that's kind of absorbed onto my body. And I'm stepping with my feet in the mikvah. Guy number two jumps in, even though the body of water itself has 39.9 whatever saw, but because that 0.01 or 0.1 that I have on my body is connected through my feet and through the water, good to go. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. That's the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore we know that there is such an idea that when a person is standing in the water, that he can bring the water on his body back into the water, 3/4 of the way down. Amar Rav Nachman, this machlokes that we just saw between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, machlokes b'maylos derabanan. That's only true when we're talking about levels of impurity that are rabbinic in nature. Aval mituma l'tahara, but going from that which is tamei midoraisa to that which is tahor midoraisa, divrei hakol hasheni tamei. Everyone agrees that when it comes to dinei doraisa, that the second person will still be tamei. That is the Tanakama's opinion. Behind the Rav Pedas. That is how Rav Pedas understood that shita of the Rabbanan. Not the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, but the shita of the Rabbanan. And Ika de Amre, some say a qualification on how to understand this machlokas. Some say that the machlokas we saw between the Tanakam and Rabbi Yehuda should be qualified as follows. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua, machlokas is only on the doraisa level mituma v'tara. Aval b'mailos derabanan, but when it comes to rabbinic levels of tuma, divrei hakol af hasheni tahor, then everyone agrees that that there would be no problem at all because it's only quote unquote it's only derabanan, and therefore we would say even the second person is tahor upliga de Rav Pedas. This doesn't work with Rav Pedas's understanding of the brisa because nobody in the brisa holds that way. Next, Amar Ula, Baimi name Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, this is a brilliant question based on some of the principles we've learned today. And this was what I was saying before about if my feet are in the water and I put a piece of metal thing to tovel on my hair and my hair is wet. Let's see how this works out. Amar Ula, Baimine me Rabbi Yochanan le Rabbi Yehuda. Mahu lahat bil machatin to tovel needles that became tameh. With sinorios, Rashi says these are very small forks that were used to shape out gold. So that's what they were, very small forks. And to put them berosho shel rishon. Remember our case. I'm the first person in the mikvah and the first person out, but I keep my feet in the top stair in the water. And that makes sure that all the water on my body is part of the added mass of water in the mikvah. Do we say good achis isle le Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Yehuda, when he agrees to this principle of good achis, that he only holds of good achis, but good asik lesle, but the water doesn't go up? What does that mean? It means that I need the water to go up to my head, halachically speaking, because I have sitting on top of my head, I have the little fork that's used for gold. It's touching my hair, no kippah, no chatzitza. It's just touching my hair right here. And it's sitting there. Do we say that the water goes up from your feet? We know you said it goes down. O dilma, no. Good asik nami islay. Or maybe we would say that we have good achis and good asik, that the water goes up and the water goes down. So the Gemara says we already have an answer to that. 4 lines from the bottom. Amrle tani tuha. We already have a source in the Tanaim that speaks about this. How so? Shalosh gemamios benachal. You have a nachal. It's kind of on a slope, and there's 3 cutouts in the slope of the mountain. Ha'elyona, hatachtona, v'ha'imtzais. There's an upper hole, a lower hole, and there is a middle height hole on the slope of the mountain. Ha'elyona v'hatachtona, the lower cutout in the mountain and the higher cutout in the mountain, shall esrim sa. Those 2, they each have only a total of 20 sa, not kosher for the mikvah. V'ha'imtzais shall arba'im sa. But the middle one, taka, does have 40 sa. So you can definitely go to the middle one. That's for sure. It's the right size. Requisite shiur. Now there's a constant flow of water from the upper to the middle to the lower. So all the waters are technically connected. What's the din? Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Meir Haya Omer Matbil Ba'elyona. Okay, let's remember the flow. In the upper pool, there's only 20 sa. But there is a stream of water that constantly drips out that connects it to the middle lower pool that has 40 sa. What did Rameir just say? You can go into the upper mikvah. There's only 20 units of water. Doesn't matter. Water goes up. Therefore, what's the conclusion? That if my feet are in the mikvah and I have a fork on my head, no problem. It is now tahor, even if it was tummy before. Because we see from here, you're in a mikvah that's too small. By the way, we don't even assume halachically that you can fit a body in that volume of water. 20 sa, think about the shape of this. It's tiny. If you only have 20 sa, it's 0.75 of a foot by 0.75 of a foot by 2.25 feet. You would have to be a toddler to fit in there. It's not even possible. And we don't care because you don't have to be covered in water. We just need the halachic principle of good asik, which one I keep saying. Asik. We need the one, a good asik, that my feet are submerged in the water and my hair is still wet, and therefore good asik, and therefore everything is going to be tahor. So we see that this idea actually works because we said that you can go into the upper mikvah, even though it was only 20 sa, because there's a chardalis shalmayim, because there's a stream of water that connects the 2. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda didn't say that. Tanya, we have another brisa that frames this out slightly differently. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, turning to the top of your Testament base, Meir Haya Omer Matbil Be'elyona. Only Rabbi Meir said that. Va'ani Omer, Rabbi Yehuda argues and says, no, Va'ani Omer Betachtona V'lo Be'elyona. No, I only hold of good achis. You can only go in the lower mikvah that's connected to the upper mikvah, but I cannot allow you to go into the upper mikvah. That's not allowed. And v'lo be'elyona. And what would that mean for our case? We wanted to know: does Rabbi Yehuda hold good achis? Just like does Rabbi Yehuda hold of good asik just like he holds of good achis? And the answer is no, he doesn't, according to this brisa. This brisa seems to say that water doesn't go up. And that's how the Gemara concludes. Amarle, Itanya, Tanya. If you have a brisa that goes against my quoting of the Mishnah, then you are correct and I am incorrect. So we reject that possibility. And therefore we would assume that no, you cannot put the little fork on top of your head while your feet are in the mikvah. If anybody asks what we learned about tonight, you can say, can you put a fork on top of your head while your feet are in the mikvah while the other guy's in the mikvah watching? This is what we learned about tonight. And halacha is that it's not allowed. It doesn't work. It has to be submerged in the water. Maybe that's where we get the submerging in mikvahs. It could be from here. I don't know. I have no idea. Next. We had said that if a person goes into the mikvah for chulin, and that was their intentions, let's see what this is like. Says the Gemara, Mani Mas Nisim, this is Rabbanan Hidashani Lahu Bein Chulin Lemaiser. If we look back in the Mishnah that we learned on Yud Ches Amud Beis, so that Mishnah indicated that there's a difference between chulin and maiser, and the Mishnah said it explicitly on the top line. It says Notlin Lechulin, Notlin Daim Lechulin, Ula Maiser. Very clear distinctions. Says the Gemara, but wait a second, Ema Seifa, in the second part of the Gemara, when we went through all of the clothing that I might wear, but then for the next level of Kedusha, it would be treated as Tumas Medras. What did we say? Ema Seifa, Big Day Am Haaretz Medras La Prushin, Big Day Prushin Medras La Ochle Truma. What's missing? Meiser Sheni. So the case of Meiser Sheni, the level of Tahara of Meiser Sheni is missing. In the Reisha of the Mishnah, our lowest level is Chulin, and then it goes to Meiser Sheni, and then it goes to Truma. But in the Seif of the Mishnah, it skips Meiser Sheni. It just goes straight from Chulin to Truma. So it says the Gemara, maybe we should therefore assume that that our Mishnah is not like that, because it doesn't seem to agree with the principle of separating between Chulin and Meiser. Says the Gemara, Asan the Reb Meir, to Amar Chulin and Meiser, Kahadei Adadin, who this seems to be like the opinion of Reb Meir, that really Chulin and Meiser are only are halachically the same, that there's no difference in how they need to be treated. What that then means, though, says the Gemara, is that Reisha Rabbanan v'Seifa Reb Meir. The Reisha, the beginning of the Mishnah, which does distinguish between Chulin and Meiser Sheni, that's the sheet of the Rabbanan. And then that would then leave the Seifa, which doesn't distinguish between Chulin and Meiser Sheni, to be the sheet of Reb Meir. And the Gemara doesn't like when we have Mishnayos that are partially authored by one and partially authored by the other. So really, the way the Gemara should be read is Reisha Rabbanan v'Seifa Reb Meir. Would we really allow for that distinction, that there's different authorship halfway through a Mishnah? Says the Gemara. Sometimes it's true. 5 lines from the bottom in Reisha Rabbanan v'Seifa Reb Meir. Rav Acha bar Ada masni la b'Seifa chamesh malos. Rav Acha bar Ada had a different version of our Mishnah, and in the Seifa he didn't have 4 levels; he had chamesh malos. He had 5 levels, adding in a distinction for Meiser Sheni, and therefore Umuki la kula kirabbanan. That fits perfectly like the rabbis, but again, that required an editing of the Mishnah. Last little sugya for the night. Let's keep going. Amar Rav Mari, Shemami, no, what can we learn from all that we've learned already tonight? Chulin shenasu al taras hakodesh kekodesh damim. We learned that there are many layers. We started with Chulin, we went to Meiser Sheni, and then to Truma, and then we spoke about Kodesh, and then we spoke about Chatas, those 5 levels. What if I am Chulin, I'm eating Chulin, but I treated them al taras hakodesh? I treated them with the level of sanctity that Kodesh requires. Can I then eat Kodesh? So says the Gemara, Kodesh Damo. Yeah, you're good to go. You treated it like Kodesh. How do we know? Mimai, says the Gemara. Says the Gemara, because we don't see a brisa that tells us that it's forbidden. We don't see that this level, that this separation of Tara is any different than anything else. Says the Gemara, no. Maybe the reason why we don't have a case of Chulin Shnasu al Taras HaKodesh is because V'dilma Haidu Lo Ktani B'hu Maila. Why we didn't specifically mention this separation between Chulin and Kodesh is because the Idamu L'Truma, if you wanted to compare it to Truma, we already had the case of Truma, Hatani Truma. V'Idamu L'Chulin, and if you wanted to compare it to Chulin, Hatani L'Chulin, we already taught that case. So there's really nothing to compare it to. It's not. After all, we have this idea. It was already taught somewhere else. Chulin Shnasu al Taras HaKodesh Harein Kechulin, Rabbi Elazar Reb Tzadok Omer Harein Ketruma. So that answer of saying that this case wasn't articulated in the Mishnah is not a good answer. Therefore, the Gemara says we learn it from the end of the Mishnah that we learned yesterday. Elami Seifa. What did we learn in the Seifa of the Mishnah? We learned a couple of stories. Rabbi Yossi, sorry, that's not correct. Yossi ben Yoezer haya chassid shebek kahuna. He was the most pious of the Kohanim. His handkerchief was treated as medras lekodesh. And Yochanan ben Gudgida haya ochel al taras hakodesh kol yamav. He treated everything on the level of taras hakodesh. What was his limitations? And v'haisa mitpachto medras lechatas. So from going from level 4 to 5, that's not allowed. What does the Gemara infer from here? Lechatas in lekodesh lo. His only limitation is on the 5th level of Tuma, the 5th level of Tahara. But when it comes to Kodesh, he's not restricted. Alma, that if a person does treat their Kodesh like Chulin, sorry, the other way, if a person treats their Chulin like Kodesh, Alma kasavar Chulin shenasu al taras kodesh ke kodesh damim, and that's how we understood the opinion of Yochanan ben Gudgida, that he did exactly what the Gemara was saying on the bottom. The line on Yud Testament base, 2 lines from the bottom, where Rav Mari said that Chulin shenasu al taras kodesh ke kodesh damim. We learned that from Yochanan ben Gudgida, who did that, and that's why the Gemara concludes Alma kasavar Chulin shenasu al taras kodesh, that a person who treats their Chulin food like the high level of sanctity of Kodesh food, it is ke kodesh damim. It is with sanctity. We'll stop right here. Pick up with Daf Chav tomorrow. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
I wanted to